I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Dean Detloff.
And I'm also your other co-host, Matt Bernico.
And Matt, I've got a big alert, a huge problem. The lights in the booth here are going off. Awoogas.
Oh, is that is?
Yep, that's exactly what it is. That's what you're seeing, hearing, etc. We have some really big news from the front lines of the culture wars, and I'm getting faxes about it, emails, texts, tweets. I'm getting woofed over here. Evangelicals, they have deployed a new weapon, Matt. They've launched this weapon at one of the most culturally significant sites in the U.S. That's right. We're talking about the multi-million-dollar ad campaign, He Gets Us. You've heard of it, Matt, so far? You've seen it in the news?
Yeah, I've seen it on the news. I've seen it on billboards. I've seen it on the internet. And I've got to tell you, I'm not thrilled about it.
It's bizarre because it's so well done. They are advertising the big man himself, Jesus Christ, in this ad campaign. It aired during the big game, the Super Bowl, and Matt, on short notice, here to talk about the campaign with us is our culture war correspondent and coincidentally Sojourners editor, a little bit of a downgrade in title if you ask me, Josiah Daniels. Josiah, you've been on the show before.
Oh, thank God you're here, Josiah.
Yeah, he beamed right in.
I love this.
He beamed into the Magnificast HQ here. Why don't you introduce yourself for folks who don't have any idea who you are, Josiah?
Yeah, wow. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do better than that. The idea that you guys are calling me a culture war correspondent is just funny as hell to me.
You've earned it. You're going to get a medal at the end.
Oh, I hope. Purple Heart. Yeah. My name's Josiah Daniels. I am the associate opinion editor for sojo.net. And I love the Magnificast. I've been able to work with both Dean and Matt on various projects. I'm very grateful that Matt is one of our columnists, and I'm happy to be here today.
We're glad to have you here today, and I'm always extremely happy that you take the time to edit the things I write so they're not so bad. Well, Josiah, we're glad that you're here. Dean has kind of like he's set me aback because he's added so much mythos to the Magnificast right here from the very top line that we have like I'm gonna have to edit in some sounds of like alerts and klaxons clanging in the background. But anyways, Josiah, glad to have you here. Great to talk to you and kind of hear like what's going on with this big Super Bowl ad. I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I don't know if I could tell you the last time I did watch the Super Bowl. Probably been years. Not since I was in youth group for sure, and I had to go to a party. But you've been following the big He Gets Us campaign for a while, and I think people really started talking about it this past week because of the Super Bowl ad. But you have some prior knowledge even to that, so. You recently published the article, What He Gets Us Ads Get Wrong About Jesus for Sojourners. So just tell us a little bit more about that. What prompted you to investigate the campaign? What's it all about? What's the big picture here?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that prompted me, so, unlike, I think maybe you and Dean, although I think that Dean is maybe a Toronto Raptors fan a little bit, but I'm a huge sports fan and I watch a lot of sports, and I've been trying to quit sports for some years now. And I will quit sports once the Chicago Bulls win one last finals. That's all that I need. I need to see that in my lifetime. But so yeah, I watch sports, and I remember last March. So this would have been March of 2022. I was watching March Madness, which is the men's college basketball tournament, and I was seeing these ads that were like, really eye catching. And I thought that they were like a little hokey, but they were like saying things that I generally agreed with. Like, Jesus had anxiety. Jesus struggled to make ends meet. They were saying these types of things that were relatable. And I was like, well, there's nothing wrong necessarily with like emphasizing the human reality that Jesus might have faced here on earth. And then I remember seeing an ad, and this is the ad that I write about for the intro of my piece. But I remember seeing an ad that said, Jesus was canceled. And like I say in my piece, the first thing that I immediately thought of was Jesus wasn't canceled, Jesus was crucified. And I think that's like a really important distinction. And I know we're going to talk about that later. But so, yeah, all of this was happening like in March of 2022, March, April, May. I kept seeing the ads, and then I especially kept seeing the ads once the football season began, and they as in He Gets Us, they were playing a lot of the ads during the NFL season, and I kept seeing them, and something just like wasn't sitting right with me. And then it was actually through two religion journalists who really caused me to want to like dig deeper and figure out kind of what was going on. Bob Smetana, who works for Religion News Service, and then Maria Bear, who actually works for Christianity Today. They've both been reporting, especially Bob. Bob has been doing a lot of reporting on He Gets Us since the ads first began. And it's just kind of been a situation where I have been following it since March, and things have kind of only come to a head, I think, sort of post Super Bowl. But it's extremely interesting, and I think that we've only really scratched the surface here.
Well, we're gonna scratch a little deeper. What a gross metaphor, but that's what we're gonna do here over the next 40 to 60 minutes. So the campaign, first of all, that's great, Josiah. Love that you're using your sports vice in this productive way. You're trying to quit sports. I'm trying to start it. I did watch the Toronto Raptors win, and then I watched a few more games after that, and every once in a while I talk to people about it. That's about as far as I've gotten, so I appreciate that you're really plugging us in. And also thanks for the parenthetical about March Madness. I feel like that's going to be useful. A lot of footnotes around sports will be helpful. This campaign, it got some traction in commentary in maybe the commentary circles of Christianity for some of those progressive themes and tropes, like you mentioned, right? Like Jesus had anxiety. Jesus hung out with the marginalized is one theme they seem to talk about. But it also sort of goes out of its way, like you said, to complain about things like cancel culture, and it has like a lot of money behind it. It's being revealed, I guess. What's the ideology that undergirds this whole thing? Because it has these sort of contradictory pieces to it.
Yeah, I mean, the question of ideology is a great one. I just want to say, too, sort of before we get too deep here, I want to say that one thing that I think He Gets Us should get credit for is, they were willing to talk to me, specifically Jason Vanderground, who is the president of Haven, which is the ad and marketing firm that is behind the He Gets Us ads. And then Jason is also the primary spokesperson for He Gets Us. And we reached out in December, and then I was able to connect with Jason in January, and we had a 40-minute phone conversation. And I asked some really hard questions, and Jason was willing to entertain those questions. And so I do just want to say, I appreciate that. With that said, I think that the ideology behind the He Gets Us campaign is really just one, basically just, it's about money. And it's sort of like, the commercialization of Jesus. And I think that there is a strong emphasis, and it doesn't take a rocket science to figure this out. You can go and look at their About Us page or any number of their other posts on their website, and you can see that the ideology is sort of this both sidesism. And I know that you guys have spent a lot of time talking on this podcast about sort of like the both sides framing, and that's totally what He Gets Us is doing, except they're framing. So they are sort of saying that there's no left, there's no right, there's just the blood of Jesus Christ, that type of thing. And I thought it was really interesting in my conversation with Jason. At one point we were talking, and I was sort of asking him about politics, specifically like whether or not he and the He Gets Us campaign, whether or not they understood a political component being part of Jesus's message, and he said no, and I was really scandalized by that. And then he followed up, and his thing was kind of like, well, we believe in this third way, which is like sort of beyond politics, and I think that third way language should like raise an alarm to anyone. Because normally what that means is it's kind of just a way to dismiss the issues of injustice that are like plaguing our society. It's a way to dismiss sort of like, Martin Luther King Jr. talks about how it's not bad to be an extremist. You just have to be an extremist for justice. And the He Gets Us campaign, they really want to move away from extremism at every point. And I think that was like especially evident in their advertisements, especially the yelling one, which I thought was so hilarious, really. But
Sorry,
anyway,
can you explain the yelling one a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, can I explain the yelling one a little bit more? I don't know. Yeah, it was just like did you guys see it? It's just like a bunch of people yelling at one another in these charged imagery is how like I would describe it, right? It's like my sister, it was so funny. And she was like saying this sarcastically. She would never say this seriously. But like one of the images is of this white woman sort of like screaming on a bus or something. And my sister was like, "Oh, there's Karen." I remember just hearing this here we were just dying laughing. But so it's like these charged images of people yelling at one another. Like one of them is someone has a mask on, someone doesn't. Some of the other ones, like it looks like maybe there's some Trump supporters, maybe there's some Black Lives Matter activists or just activists in general. And then the end of the message is just, Jesus wants us to love our enemies. And I mean, that's a message that I agree with. And I think it's a message that the two of you agree with too. But one of the things I think that the three of us could all agree on is sometimes like loving your enemies means confronting them and telling them that they're wrong about things. And sometimes you're not doing that in like a polite way. And so, there's like almost this emphasis, I think, with the He Gets Us campaign on like politeness too. And I think being polite is important, right? But I also don't think that, I think that the time to like be polite to the police is over. like a confrontation of some type does have to happen. And I think that if Jesus were around today, Jesus wouldn't be going and hugging a police officer. I think Jesus would have harsh words for the police. So yeah, that's a little bit of the background about like the ideology of the campaign. One of the things that Jason had told me too that I thought was really interesting was I asked him, I was like, okay, when you say third way politics, what comes to my mind is like, Scott McKnight or Brian Zahnd. So I was like, who kind of like theologically are you guys working with in regards to sort of like developing this third way premise or this third way theological conviction? And he was like, oh, we're kind of just like reading our Bibles. And I was like, oh, interesting, So it's still a very evangelical campaign, if you ask me. And then Bob Smetana, he reported that David Green, who's one of the co-founders of Hobby Lobby, a billionaire evangelical, he reported that he's one of the donors of the campaign. And so there's big money behind this campaign. There are evangelicals behind this campaign from what we know, because a lot of the donor base is actually like mysterious to us. And then when I and other reporters have asked, who is your donor base? What he gets us to come back with is, well, the donors want to remain anonymous because they, don't want to let the right hand know what their left hand is doing. They want to make this movement about Jesus, not about them. And really, to me, this is an opinion. To me, that's just a way to avoid transparency. And I think that is one of the most disturbing things about the He Gets His campaign. It does not seem transparent in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I have a bunch of other questions for you about this, but I do want to just kind of like take a second to pull out some of this a bit more for people. If you haven't seen, dear listeners, what this looks like, you can go to the hegetsus.com website and look through it. They have a page that I think is really interesting called He Gets Us Has an Agenda. And I think what is interesting to me about the whole thing is how confused and maybe purposefully duplicitous the rhetoric is. So, for example, they're like, I mean, they have this whole sort of like manifesto about what they're all about on this page and whatever their agenda is. But it's really frustratingly set up because they'll have a big highlighted bold section that said, "How did the story of a man who taught and practiced unconditional love become associated with hatred and oppression for so many people?" Right? So this is like kind of like the crux of what they're doing is like Jesus is this like character in our culture who is for some reason like now culturally divisive, even though that's not the message of Jesus. And then it'll say something like this later down the page. We look at the biography of Jesus through a modern lens to find new relevance in often overlooked moments and themes of his life. And it's just like so bizarre to me because what they're talking about is not any of the teachings of Jesus, like not any of the parables. They're not really talking about like, any of like the things that are actually in the Gospels, but what they're actually talking about is like sort of this weird, I think, liberal reading of what Jesus is actually doing. Where Jesus is this guy who is telling us just to love our enemies and to take this third way forward or something, rather than actually like standing with people who who have skin in the game. I don't know. To me, it just feels so confused because it's telling you there's something really important about Jesus. There's something really important about Jesus, and you need to pay attention to this thing. But then when you look to like what it is they're trying to tell you is important, it's not anything. It's just like Jesus is a nice guy and that's cool for you, right? Like that to me it just seems so weird, right? It's like there's like a bait and switch involved where they're telling you it's so important that you look at this thing, but when you actually do look, they're offering you very little, and it's frustrating to me.
Isn't this sort of like the epitome of fiscally conservative, socially liberal? Like that's all that this campaign is to me, with like an evangelical twist. I mean, I was really, I was just like really shocked by the trivialization of so much of what Jesus stood for, whether it's the crucifixion of Jesus or whether it is, legitimately the idea that Jesus did stand with the marginalized. I don't think, I don't have any doubts about that. Or, whether, the idea that Jesus affirmed women, women were part of Jesus's group of disciples. Yeah, all of that's absolutely true. What I think where the campaign really, really gets it wrong, and the three of us as good Marxists, I think that this is like kind of a hinge point for us. The campaign completely gets it wrong on the issue of money, right? Like the material emphasis, like that can't be emphasized enough. This idea that there's $100 million that this campaign is working with, and as far as I understand it, they're going to be working with $1 billion over the next 3 years, right? And that is, I don't know any other way to say this. This is like straight up biblical language, Hebrew Bible style. That is an abomination. It's an abomination, and it doesn't to use this money for anything other than actually improving the material circumstances of people in this world who are downtrodden, who are getting evicted, who have lost loved ones to COVID, who are houseless. To use the money for anything other than actually improving the material circumstances of the marginalized and oppressed, it's wrong. And I just don't know how you can justify saying on the one hand that you all believe that Jesus supported the marginalized, and then on the other hand you're working with a budget that is, that is so extremely bloated. I don't know. I have to stop because I'm starting kind of just like rave like a lunatic. But you guys get the idea.
I think. I mean, you're right though, right? I mean, it's like, can you imagine the gospel if like the rich young ruler goes to Jesus and says, "Lord, Lord, what do I have to do to be perfect?" And Jesus says, "Take your billions of dollars and make a commercial for me." That's bonkers. No, of course not. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like the ultimate bourgeoisification of Jesus, right? The us that Jesus gets is basically a like middle class, basic income kind of person. At the end of the day, right? Jesus doesn't understand the poor well enough to think like you should form a union and go on strike so you can like get a higher wage, right? That's the Jesus that is kind of missing, I guess, from the campaign. And I think that's kind of an interesting piece about third way politics in general. Something we talk about a lot, but it ultimately ends up basically collapsing into the regular politics that everybody has, right? Just basically liberal capitalism. And that's the us that Jesus is kind of allowed to get when you have millions of dollars poured into an ad campaign, because you could never pour millions of dollars into a campaign and have Jesus be like, yeah, I think we should maybe think twice about, the exploitation of working people or rising rent, or how like central banks are raising inflation on purpose to like kick people out of their jobs. Like, that's the kind of Jesus that doesn't maybe lend well to like a multi-million-dollar Hobby Lobby campaign.
That's like one of the things that's frustrating, right? It's like, okay, so this is one thing that I really actually do want to make clear. I'm a Christian, and in a weird way, I really like being a Christian. And part of the reason that I really like being a Christian is because I actually do think that Jesus is an extremely compelling figure. And again, when I originally saw the ads, I was like, okay, one thing that some like people have responded on Twitter, and they've done this in good faith as far as I'm concerned. I don't have any reason to believe that they are doing this in bad faith. But one of the things that they've said is like, well, like it's at least it's getting like Jesus's name out there or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, like I can like kind of see where you're coming from. But if the version of Jesus that the campaign is promoting is a version that would not just like, do I believe that if Jesus were around today, that he might go out to dinner and that he might go out to dinner with David Green? Yes, I can believe that Jesus might go out to dinner with David Green. He'd make him pay too, I think. But like, I can believe that. But Jesus at the end of that dinner would be having a Zacchaeus moment, like with him, right? Like it wouldn't be a thing where it's like, oh, thanks for all the hard work that you're doing for me, advertising. That's not the, I don't think that's the authentic Jesus. That's certainly not the Jesus of the Bible. So yeah, I mean, I think that one of my really big issues and one of the big motivators behind why I wanted to write the piece was to be like, hey man, like Jesus is like really important to me. And I actually think too that Jesus is important to a large segment of society. Many of those people being people who would be poor and oppressed. But so like, don't fuck around with Jesus. Like don't create this composite character of Jesus that is just like a cool dude who really loves everyone and could get along with anyone, and he actually really did get along with it. It's like, dude, Jesus was crucified. Why was he crucified? What does Jesus' crucifixion tell us about his politics, the people that he stood with, what he stood for?
Yeah, let's maybe dive even further into some of the rhetoric in the campaign, because I think that there's also some weird ways that it's trying to present Jesus as a radical, but in a certain way, in a weird way maybe. And there's a few angles that we can take. I'm going to throw out maybe a weird one. So Josiah and I went to school together in undergrad at this very bizarre Christian evangelical school. And we were in school at like peak mid 2000s, late aughts, the Obama evangelical years. And I feel like in that time, there was a sort of popular brand of countercultural evangelicalism, right? Represented by people like Shane Claiborne or some of these kind of like emergent church folks who might have said some similar things that are said in this campaign, that Jesus is kind of like doing this third way thing. He's not, right or left, but he is going out to the marginalized and so on. But at least like Shane Claiborne had the courage to like, I don't know, live in community in like a poor neighborhood or something like that. Like there's some kind of authenticity there. But this feels like almost the commercialization of the same kind of impulse. What do you think about that, Josiah? As a big former Jesus evangelical, did the market sort of like get to that trend late? Is there something else going on? Is this just like a logic that's kind of endemic to evangelicalism that sort of, breaks right or left or center every once in a while in a big way? Like what's kind of happening with that piece of it?
That is such an interesting question, and it's something that I've thought a lot about. And also, Dean, I want to tell you that not only did you and I go to a conservative evangelical school, but also Jason Vanderground, the spokesperson for He Gets Us, he actually went to our same school. So Jason and I got to connect over that too, which was really funny.
Here's another weird like planetary alignment though, Josiah, that is very uncomfortable. So that same guy, Jason, apparently, I learned this from somebody, did the marketing campaign in 2008, I think it was, for that same school. And the campaign was "See You in 3D." And there's a picture of me and several other people in it. So all the way back, I mean, the threads are there. There's some deep conspiracy going on. How are we wrapped up in this, Josiah?
That's awesome. So, but back to the question. When I think about someone like Shane Claiborne, which, I'm going to do a quick plug here for my coworker, Mitchell Atencio, who is the associate news editor at sojo.net. He actually has an interview with Shane Claiborne coming out maybe tomorrow. And so that would be February 17th. And it's about his new book, and it's also about abortion. And let me tell you, Shane says some really interesting, spicy things. Mitchell also kind of pins him down on Israel-Palestine. So anyway, but Yeah, I mean, like when I think of Shane Claiborne, it is sort of like the Jesus for President thing. It is sort of like the third way politics thing. But it's like you said, Dean. It's like, Shane at least had the courage, and I like the way that you phrased that. Shane had the courage to live in community, and he also had the courage to like get arrested. And he also wasn't such a. I'm just gonna say this. He also wasn't such a dumbass to be like Jesus wasn't political. Like Shane would never say that, right? So I think that there is something like really duplicitous and mysterious about the way in which he gets us uses the language of, like on that he gets us as an agenda page. One of the things that they say is Jesus is a love activist, and it's like what the fuck does that mean? But so like I think that the deal is that okay, like one of the things I want to try and be as succinct about this as I possibly can. One of the things that I think he gets us is worried about, and this is something that is not unique just to He Gets Us, but this is like something that I think evangelicals are especially worried about, is the fact that Gen Zers and millennials are leaving the church and they're trying to figure out, okay, how can we get these groups of people back into the church? And one of the things I think that they've come down on is, okay, we're going to use this sort of like hip social justice lingo. And so in that way, I think that it is sort of like this strategy by whether it's He Gets Us or other churches or, other Christian organizations, it's this strategy to sort of get younger generations back into, Christianity. I think that the other thing, though, that I'd say is I think that there is a growing concern with the progressive nature of Gen Z and millennials. Like one of the studies that I was looking at was from Pew Research, talking about how like Gen Z and millennials much more progressive than previous generations, and we agree on a lot of points, whether it's like environmentalism, whether it's poverty issues, whether it's LGBTQ issues. And I think that what the He Gets Us campaign might be trying to do is it might be trying to convince people to go away from extremism on issues of human rights. And when I say extremism, again, I'm thinking of like being extremist for the rights of poor and oppressed people. And so I think that all the talk about third way, all the talk about avoiding extremism is a way for the campaign to suggest to younger generations, like, hey, they're rather than being an extremist, let me talk to you about the greatness of being, a moderate or whatever. And that's like a little bit of my interpretation on what one possible thing that they might be doing too.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I mean, just looking at the website, that was definitely a vibe I got. But hearing you say it, I think makes a lot more sense. It's a campaign that takes it's not a religion, it's a relationship
Right.
to like a whole new level
of. And I don't know about you guys, but I want religion. Like I want, pure, undefiled religion. Standing up for the orphans and widows. I'll take religion over a relationship any day. Not that the two have to be, diametrically opposed, but you understand.
No, exactly. Give me a stinky church full of incense and a priest in a robe, and I'm happy about it.
Right.
Well, let's talk about some more of the rhetoric, though, because I think it's bad, like damningly bad, actually. There's a part of the He Gets Us campaign that does suggest that Jesus was canceled, and Man, that's got to be pretty close to blasphemy because of how dumb it is. But you talk about in your article that Jesus wasn't canceled. In fact, something entirely different happened. Jesus was crucified, which is a pretty important distinction to make, I think. So you also mentioned Ignacio Ellacuria, one of our podcast faves, who is in case people don't know, a Salvadoran Jesuit and liberation theologian who presents this kind of like different soteriological vision of Jesus. So when the He Gets This campaign says that Jesus was canceled, like what are they doing, do you think? And then like, I don't know, how does that miss the important stuff about Jesus?
Yeah, man. Yeah, the Jesus was canceled one just like almost gave me a brain aneurysm just because I thought it was so ridiculous. I just really felt like it trivialized the crucifixion. And one of the things that often comes to mind, just because of the times, is a Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer he says that, the only sign of God in the world is the cross. And that's something that I really believe, especially now. I mean, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, of course, is writing during the time of the Holocaust. And, when I think about the times that we're living in, mass incarceration, or, COVID, or the environmental crisis, God is still on the cross. But, the language of cancellation, you guys know it well. It is language that specifically resonates with a demographic of people who I like to call the canceled class. It's like, these people are well off and they usually are really just kind of like dealing with consequences of something that they did or something that they said. So like, for example, this is another sports reference, I'm sorry, but, Kyrie Irving, who is a point guard for the Dallas Mavericks, but before he was a point guard for the Dallas Mavericks, he played for the Brooklyn Nets, and he said terribly, terribly anti-Semitic things. He was suspended for a few games. He was told that he had to offer a donation to groups fighting anti-Semitism. And he had to do, the whole apology circuit, posted something on Instagram, blah, 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 right? And a lot of people, I think, would understand Kyrie as someone who has been canceled. And yet he is still playing in the NBA. He's still a millionaire, and he still has incredible amount of power. And that to me is sort of like the epitome of a person who would experience cancellation. And that type of cancellation, and most importantly, right, I think one of the biggest difference between cancellation and crucifixion is, if Kyrie has been canceled, if you like, and Jesus has been crucified, the main point of departure there, right, is that, Jesus was literally murdered, executed, and Kyrie is, living his best life. So I think that there is like a huge distinction there, and I really question who just exactly it is that the campaign is trying to like make that message of cancellation, crucifixion resonate with. One of the things that Jason had told me, because when we were talking, I think that he picked up that I was like, dude, I kind of think this is bullshit. And so I think he was like, well, it's like an allegory. And even still, I was like, yeah, that's still like not working for me. Like there's no connection between cancellation and crucifixion. And I think too, just, to like talk about this in terms of class, not that we haven't been doing that, but like in terms of class, it's like there's the crucified class, right? And Curia talks about, who those people are. And so if the crucified class are people who are poor and oppressed, and they are people who the world is sort of like built on the backs of, if that's the crucified class, then the canceled class, they are the people who are doing the crucifying. They are the people who are nailing the crucified people to the crosses. So there's no connection. And I hope that at least came through in the piece. If that was the only thing that was clear in the piece, I can live with that. But there is no connection between being canceled and being crucified. And also, just for the record, it's like, yeah, I don't even know if being canceled is a real phenomenon. I think it's really more so a situation of being called out, having to have some uncomfortable conversations. Yeah. So hopefully that came through.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a great allegory. It's basically the Narnia of our time. And I think Jesus, he should be let back on Twitter. He should get a stand-up set back. He should...
oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I can't wait to read his next YA novel series. I think that he should be uncanceled. So I guess the next part of He Gets Us should be like on the third day he did get uncanceled, right? That would be sort of the natural progression.
Yeah.
You can tell Jason, he can have that one for free. So you made this other interesting point, though, Josiah, on Twitter about how this campaign is doing something kind of like what Olufemi Otaiwo talks about in his book Elite Capture, which you have also made some space for in Sojourners in the past. In that book, there's this really interesting observation that progressive ideas are kind of like metabolized or sucked up by these conservative or reactionary forces, but they're not necessarily for that reason, useless or whatever. But we have to sort of pay attention to how the elite captures, movement rhetoric and things like that. Could you say maybe a little bit more about that connection? It just seems like a really interesting thing to sort of map on to like what's going on in this ad campaign with all these different rhetorical turns.
Yeah, Olufemi Otaiwo, awesome guy. Do read his book Elite Capture. Also read his book Reconsidering Reparations. Yeah, I got to interview Taiwo. Again, I do want to emphasize for your audience, that's Olufemi O. O is his middle initial. Olufemi O. Taiwo. Taiwo is his last name. But I got to interview Taiwo, and it was a really incredible interview. He's just a really smart, down-to-earth guy from the Midwest, of course. And as three Midwest dudes here on this podcast, I think we can all agree Midwest people, they're the best. But in all seriousness, it's funny. When I first saw the ads, I was like, okay, whatever, maybe this is good. And then when the Sojourners editorial team started to do a little bit more digging, one of the things that Mitchell had said to me that I just thought was so funny, and it really, again, it kind of like made me think like, okay, there's something more going on here. But Mitchell was like, this is the elite capture of Jesus. And, at the time we had been talking about Taiwo. Mitchell was reading Taiwo. We were getting ready to do an interview with Taiwo. And so one of the things I think that Taiwo pointed out to me that I then thought more deeply about while I was writing the piece and doing research on He Gets Us is there is Taiwo is writing Elite Capture specifically about the elite capture of identity politics language. And of course, identity politics, it is not necessarily something that, like when we think of identity politics today, I think we think of like the Democratic Party using it to sort of like pit people against one another almost, when in reality, like the idea that each one of us has specific identities in society that we then use to sort of like connect with other people, and then we can use those identities to work towards shared concerns with others who might have different identities than us. That idea was actually a radical idea, first sort of like created by the Combahee River Collective, and they were a group of socialist feminists. And so Taiwo in the book uses that as a starting point to talk about, okay, here's this radical group who comes up with this idea that, if your gender is particularly important to you, your race is particularly important to you, that's fine. But then how can you use your lived experience, the identity that society sort of like imparts on you? How can you use that to then join with other forces to work towards the shared goal of human liberation? How did that then get captured? How did the language there get captured by people in the Democratic Party, and is now being used and deployed in ways that actually, cause division? And so specifically when it comes to the He Gets Us campaign, I think what they have been able to do, and I won't say successfully yet, because I think that we still have like a long way to go to see kind of what happened with this campaign. But one of the things that they're doing, right, is they're trying to use social justice language, like activists, like marginalized, like, they're trying to use this social justice language that they've seen and heard in society on social media, and they're trying to capture it, to use it in terms that, again, resonate, I think, with younger generations or people who are concerned about justice issues, but then they're actually not doing jack shit about any of the stuff that they're sort of talking about. So sorry, that was like kind of a long answer, but hopefully that specifically sort of like showed kind of how I see Taiwo's idea of elite capture relating to what's happening with the He Gets His campaign and, just social justice language in general.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's an important thing to navigate, I think, in all of this. Something else I think that it might be worth talking about is Sojourners as an entity, right? You all have been tracking the moves among like conservative Christians for a while. And I've appreciated it. Dean's appreciated it. We love it. We love Sojourners. It's all great. Mitchell, Jenna Barnett, Betsy Shirley, and all kinds of other folks. You guys are doing great work. Just want to say it on this podcast in front of God and everybody and you. And yeah. But what do you think a campaign like this like signals about the direction that conservative Christianity is heading? Is this a change in rhetoric? Is there a change that's maybe deeper here? Is this just polishing the surface of the evangelical turd, as it were?
One of the things I often think of, you guys started this podcast in 2016 around the time of Trump, right? And I think that we can all agree that the Trump administration was an abject moral failure. But it doesn't actually do much good to just like sit around and kind of do hand wringing about it. Because in reality, a lot of the policies that the Trump administration enacted over the 4 years, they were like really successful. And I'm not talking about success from like a moral perspective. I'm talking about success from like they got to do what they wanted to do. I think that something that we have to be like really careful about with conservative Christianity, conservative evangelicalism, it's really easy to look at the He Gets His campaign and kind of like laugh at it and be like, these fools, like, it's really easy to like, see through sort of their ads, their commercials, and be like, it's easy to track the money. But I think that we would be remiss to not take what they're doing seriously. And specifically what I mean is, they are working with these, again, just bloated budgets. There's not transparency. Some of the groups that they're connected with are very, very disturbing. And so I think that the thing that we need to keep in the forefront of our mind is conservative Christianity and the conservative movement just in general. It may seem on its face extremely naive, but there is sort of like a method to the madness. And in this case, I really think that the method to the madness is trying to get younger people or people who are concerned about justice issues, trying to get them to come to a place where they're maybe less concerned about justice issues, or they don't want to be politically active, or they do not believe that engaging in activism is important. In other words, they believe that the status quo, is just fine. And I think that that's one of sort of like the political results that the campaign is possibly pushing for, sort of like in the background. So yeah, I think we're going to see more of this type of stuff. I think we are going to see more Christians sort of, talking about how they think judgmentalism and hypocrisy are bad, and then not really doing anything about hypocrisy, judgmentalism, or again, like the material circumstances of people in the world who are hurting most. And I think that he gets us wants to talk about this as a rebrand of Jesus. And in reality, I think that it is more so a rebranding of the kind of Christianity that says, you know what, the only thing that we really need is just the Bible. We don't need anything else. And that's like a dangerous version of Christianity, but it's a version of Christianity that should be taken very seriously. We should engage with it, we should critique it, and we should offer something better to people who are curious.
I think that's a good point, that you have to like take it more seriously than maybe I want to, for sure. I was thinking about it a little bit more, and there is definitely like a time in my life where this would have definitely been my whole thing. Like I would have really liked this, as I think like
Sure. Yeah.
Like as a young adult evangelical trying to figure out what to do with religion now that I like kind of am I'm too old to go to youth group, and now I have to figure out something else. I don't think I've seen anyone else talk about this part of it, and maybe that shows my being underread in the topic. But the He Gets Us website does have a spot where you can get a free T-shirt from them,
Right.
and that's, I think, bonkers to me.
You have to love someone. You have to love someone in order to get the free T-shirt, though, as far as I know.
It's true. I went to the website and it says "Pay with Love."
Right.
You can get a T-shirt, a hat, and a sticker, and they'll even pay for shipping. And the shirts say something like, Jesus was a refugee, or Jesus was wrongly judged, which is a very bizarre T-shirt to wear. Like you're relitigating that like so many years later. But it's just such a weird thing, right? There's a whole aesthetic to it in all of the pictures. Like everyone's like skateboarding, or they look like a cool person. And all that I'm trying to say is there's an aesthetic here that they're really going for, and I think it definitely appeals to a certain type of person. And it would definitely work to, I think, reinforce a particular like regime of beliefs in their life. Not taking it lightly is a good advice.
As you're saying that though, Matt, one thing that I find really fascinating about this, also as a person who would have found this really appealing at some point in my life, Matt and I have talked before on the show about how one strange thing about the evangelical impulse to like just read your Bible is that like the Bible is a weird book, and eventually it will make you think something weird, and like for better and for worse, for sure. But like the idea of identifying Jesus with a refugee, for example, is like actually pretty impressive for evangelicals, right? Like you're not going to get a Trump Christian to say that. In fact, they'd say the opposite, right? That Jesus would be like, you should keep all these people out of our country. And I think there's something about that that's really quite interesting. And I feel like maybe what's most bizarre to me about He Gets Us is that as a campaign, it feels like kind of off the map, or like it feels like it belongs in a different time, and that could just be because it belongs in a different moment of my own like biography, which I'm like projecting onto the world in some kind of like deeply troubling psychoanalytic way. But I guess like there's something kind of strange about the idea of pouring millions of dollars into a campaign that is going to say something like that, to identify Jesus with the marginalized and kind of like try to struggle through what that means without actually having to commit yourself to like changing the structural conditions that make them marginalized or something like that. So yeah, I guess all that to say, I think it's bizarre because I have a moment of sympathy for it. It's like, man, you're like so close, so close to getting it. Like, maybe if you read the Bible a little bit more, or like got to that part about Jesus and the money changers, or thought about politics a little harder. But I don't know. Maybe let's say this. All right, I'm gonna pretend to be one of the people in your Twitter replies, Josiah, and I'm gonna say, they're all like, at least someone's talking about Jesus. I'm gonna say this is the moment. Leftist Christians, we should do our own "He Gets Us" campaign, and we should be like, yep. He gets us, and that's why Jesus was a refugee, and he thinks that we need to, like, abolish all borders. We should just push it as far as we can.
There is a part of me that wants to be really sympathetic to He Gets Us. And then, frankly, there's a part of me that wants to be really sympathetic to Jason. At one point in our conversation, and I mentioned this in the piece, Jason reminded me about Matthew 25. And after our phone conversation, I went and I read Matthew 25, and I was like, shit. Like, that is a really intense passage, talking about sheeps and the goats, and whatever you don't do to the least of these, it's complicated because I really love the Bible too, but I think you're right, Dean, where it's like the Bible is going to make you have some weird thoughts at some point. And I think especially when you read something like Matthew 25, or you read about Lazarus and the rich man, or you read about Zacchaeus, or you're going to be really confronted with some difficult things that you have to work through. And so then the question becomes, okay, like how can I work through this, and then how can I be charitable maybe to other people who don't necessarily agree with the perspective that I'm coming from? Because I think one of my biggest convictions, right, is that Jesus came to liberate the world from poverty. Jesus came to liberate the world from war. Jesus came to liberate the world from capitalism. And so, yeah, it's awkward to be having a conversation with someone like Jason, and there is a certain amount of sympathy, or having a conversation with someone who's like, well, like, what's actually really wrong with He Gets Us? They're talking about, Jesus being a refugee. They're talking about Jesus getting humanity. But I think that one of the things, right, is it's like, dude, Jesus certainly gets us to a certain extent. And then there is another aspect where Jesus does not get us at all. And like, specifically what I mean is, it's like, Jesus didn't get Pilate. Like, Jesus wasn't like wasn't understanding like where Pilate was coming from. Jesus wasn't understanding where the rich were coming from. And so I think that there is like a certain appeal in that language of Jesus sympathizing with humanity. And again, there's a certain like appeal to me of people who might be compelled by some of the language within the He Gets Us campaign. And I do think that the big thing for leftist Christians is we have to figure out, okay, some of this language is appealing to people. How can we meet these people halfway? Be willing to have sort of these awkward, uncomfortable conversations with them. Be willing to sort of like push them more toward not just reading the Bible, which again, I think it's great to read the Bible. But so not just push them toward reading the Bible, but how can we then push them toward becoming politically involved, becoming politically active, specifically for the sake of the people who Jesus talks about as the least of these. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Something else I was trying to figure out about this whole campaign, I feel like we're going way over time, but this is my podcast, I don't care. But I've been trying to figure out like what is the ask with this?
Right. I don't think there is one.
So I was looking around on their website a little bit more, and at the end of like every article, there is always like a learn more,
Mm.
explore button is what they say. So if you click that, it brings you to I don't know, some kind of like other third party website. It's basically like a Bible study guide that they give you and they want you to sign up for.
It's through YouVersion, right? I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, exactly. So they set you up with this like 7-day Bible study. And here's the thing that is just like kind of like weird about it to me is that they set you up with the Bible study, but they aren't giving you, they're not just like saying, okay, and then here's the Bible and like you can just read it. What they give you is another same rhetoric type of blog post as you just read on the He Gets Us website with one scripture verse. Not like a chapter.
It's blog posts all the way down.
It is. And then so at the end of the blog post it says scripture, read John 14:27. And it's like, that's one verse, bud. Like that's not even a chapter, and that's not even a story in the Bible. That's just one verse.
Yeah.
And it's just mind-numbingly weird, because it's like, what do they want you to do? And it doesn't even seem like the answer is to read the Bible. It's like they want you just to read another sort of like, like ChatGPT generated like blog post that they've written about Jesus or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess that's what seems so weird about it to me, is that it is just like, I think that like they want you to think that you're reading the Bible or that you're learning something, but really you're falling, kind of what you're just taking another step kind of down this like weird ideological reading of like the gospel. And again, you're not going to see the stuff that's like maybe a little bit too uncomfortable, at least not right off the bat, right? Not until you get to like maybe some of the further days or whatever.
Yeah.
It just all seems like really put together in an intentional way as to exclude particular things that might rock the boat.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. I guess like it's weird to be like, okay, Jesus was a refugee, and like, so what though? The next step is not there. Or even like, I don't know, Jesus felt this way about the marginalized, and like, here's a way of getting into it. It's true that it's not really even a kind of biblical literacy campaign, which is kind of bizarre. But I guess that's what happens when you have millions of dollars that you can just sort of throw in a garbage can and be like, good luck.
I don't exactly know what the end game of all of this is. What I do know, though, is it does just feel like there is a co-opting of justice lingo, and to what end? Maybe the end is just to get people to read verses of scripture and blog posts. But man, like it's strange to me. And I think there's a lot more that is yet to be discovered about He Gets Us. I don't know if they'll ever be talking with me again. But I would, of course, welcome any opportunity to talk with anybody over there, or anybody connected to the campaign. But yeah, it's definitely very strange. Specifically, the language and some of the stuff around loving your enemy. I mean, you see that Jesus has canceled that, and at one point, they have this black person hugging a police officer, and that's a charged image. That image is saying something, whether or not He Gets Us wants to admit it. There's a lot being said in that image.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the ad? I think it was from a past Super Bowl though, when I can't remember who it was. Kylie Jenner, maybe, I don't know. Somebody. It was like this like Pepsi ad where there was like a protest, and then all of a sudden they all had Pepsi. It feels like that, but Jesus.
Jesus is the Pepsi of Kylie Jenner. Well, Josiah, it's been great to have you on as our culture war correspondent, and I can tell you're going to get back into the investigative reporting minds here. You're going to get to the bottom of it with your big fedora and your trench coat and your notepad and your bulletin board full of pins and yarn. And we can't wait to have you back once you've emerged from solving this bizarre mystery of who done it, who did do the He Gets Us campaign. Until that happens, though, where can people find your writing? Anything else that you might be into or up to? What do you want to plug at the end?
Yeah, wow. Okay, so the main thing that I want to plug is I do want to give our online editorial assistant, Zachary Lee. I want to give him a shout out. He helped me with the research for this piece. So just shout out to Zachary Lee. Thanks so much for your help on the research for this. But then too, I want to make sure to highlight some of the reporting that my coworkers have done, specifically Mitchell and Betsy on Jean Vanier. And then also Sojourners, we have a podcast called Lead Us Not, which is an investigative podcast about John Vanier. It is a tough listen, so I will say that. But Jenna Barnett, she has been doing a great job with that podcast, and so yeah, I just want to give the podcast a shout out. And then I also just want to say thanks to the people who have been working very hard on our social media. I'm not a big social media guy. Heather Brady and Kiera, thanks so much for what you guys have been dealing with on social media. But yeah, so you can read my work. You can read most of it just going to sojo.net. If you really want, you can check out my muck rack. I'll let you guys put that maybe in the show notes. It is in my Twitter bio. If you want to follow me on Twitter and see me post pictures of myself with inspirational signs, because that's actually what I'm on Twitter for. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can go to Josiah_R Daniels, and you can follow me on there. I love to take elongated breaks from Twitter, so there's times where I don't go on for a month. So good luck trying to catch me on there. But
you are in our podcast Discord. I guess people could find you there.
That's true. Yeah, people can totally find me there. And I do check Discord. I probably check Discord more than I check Twitter, which is not really saying too much, honestly. But more and more I'm trying to get out of like the whole social media thing. I think it was Brueggemann who said, Walter Brueggemann, Old Testament theologian. I think it was Brueggemann who said that the only social media that he wanted to do was email. And I was like, okay, I feel that.
I feel like that's even a bad choice, honestly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can go read everything else Josiah wrote. I'm sure you're going to love it. You probably loved this Great He Gets Us piece, so why wouldn't you like the rest of it? You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Magnificast. And if you support us at $2 or more, you can get into this great Discord that we just mentioned for exclusive access to at least exactly one guest, Josiah Daniels, who is also in the Discord. We do another podcast there sometimes called The Walk-In. That is a good time. Our music is by Mario Armstrong. The outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. At least I would have